The darkness felt like a heavy blanket. It wasn't just the absence of light in the room. It was a deep, soul-weary darkness that had settled over everything. Each day felt the same, a long gray hallway with no windows and no doors at the end. The problem sat on my chest like a boulder, making every breath a chore, every thought a struggle. It was a shadow that followed me from the moment I woke up until I fell into a restless sleep. I felt utterly alone, stranded on a tiny island with waves of worry crashing over me, threatening to pull me under for good. It was a storm that never seemed to end. I carried this burden everywhere I went. To the kitchen for a cup of coffee that I barely tasted. To the office, where the tasks seemed meaningless and blurry. The weight was invisible to others, but for me, it was as real as the ground beneath my feet. It was the weight of bills I couldn't pay, of relationships that felt fractured beyond repair, of a future that looked like a locked iron gate. Hope was a distant memory, a word from a language I no longer spoke. I was just going through the motions, a ghost in my own life, haunted by a problem that was too big to name and too heavy to carry. My own strength was gone. I had spent it all. I had tried every solution I could think of, turned every stone, knocked on every door that I could find. But every path led to a dead end. Every effort felt like pushing against a mountain that would not budge an inch. The feeling of failure was constant, a bitter taste in my mouth. I was tired. Not just tired from a lack of sleep, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that came from fighting a battle I knew I was losing. The silence in my small apartment was deafening, amplifying the loud shouts of my own despair. It was in this place of complete emptiness that I finally stopped trying to be strong. What was the point? My strength was a leaky bucket, unable to hold even a drop of courage. The world outside kept spinning, people laughed, the sun rose and set, but my world had ground to a halt. I was stuck in the longest night of my life, a night that seemed to have forgotten how to end. The shadows danced on the walls, mocking my weakness. I had nothing left. I was at the very bottom, looking up at a sky that was starless and black, feeling completely and utterly lost. In the middle of that profound silence, a new sound emerged. It wasn't loud. It was a gentle whisper, a quiet thought that nudged its way into my mind. You are not alone. Where did that come from? It was a simple thought, yet it felt different from all the frantic, fearful ones that had been swirling around. I had tried everything else, hadn't I? I had relied on my own plans, my own power, my own logic. And here I was, shipwrecked. Maybe, just maybe, there was another way. A way I had forgotten or ignored for a very long time. I remembered stories from my childhood. Stories of a God who parts seas and calms storms. A God who is a friend to the broken-hearted. For so long that God felt distant, like a character in a book I hadn't opened in years. But in my desperation, I reached for that book. I found myself on my knees, not because I felt holy, but because I was too weak to stand any longer. I didn't have fancy words or a perfect prayer. I just had my brokenness. I spoke into the darkness, my voice barely a whisper. God, if you are there, I need you. I can't do this anymore. Please help me. It wasn't a magic spell. The boulder didn't vanish from my chest instantly. The bills didn't disappear from the table, but something else happened. A flicker, a tiny warm flicker of something I hadn't felt in ages. Hope. It was like striking a match in a vast, dark cave. The flame was small, but it was enough to push back the shadows just a little. It was the hope that even if my situation didn't change, I was no longer facing it by myself. I had knocked on a door I thought was locked forever, and I felt a presence on the other side. That simple prayer changed the atmosphere in the room. The heavy, suffocating silence was replaced by a quiet sense of peace. It was the peace of surrender. The peace that comes from finally letting go of the rope in a tug of war you can never win. I had handed the problem over. I had admitted I was not strong enough, not smart enough, not capable enough to solve it. I had placed my impossible situation into the hands of a God who, I was beginning to believe, dealt in the impossible every single day. The weight was still there, but I was no longer carrying it alone. The days that followed were different, not because the mountain had moved, but because my gaze had shifted. Instead of staring at the giant, immovable rock in front of me, I started looking up. I began to see small signs of grace, little glimmers of light I had been blind to before. A kind word from a stranger felt like a message sent just for me. A forgotten song on the radio with lyrics about hope felt like a divine whisper. These weren't coincidences. They were reminders. They were God's way of saying, I'm here, I'm working, Just watch." Then, a surprising thing happened. A phone call came out of the blue. It was about an old job application I had submitted months ago and completely forgotten about. An interview was scheduled. It wasn't a guaranteed solution, but it was a door creaking open, a door I hadn't even knocked on. It was like watching the first ray of sunlight break over the horizon after the longest, darkest night. The light was pale at first, but it held the promise of a new day. The darkness was still present, but it was no longer absolute. It was retreating. This small breakthrough gave me strength. It was a tangible piece of evidence that my prayer had been heard. Faith, which had been a tiny flickering candle, began to burn a little brighter. I started to understand that God's work is not always a sudden earthquake that moves the mountain in an instant. Sometimes it's the slow and steady erosion of the rock, one gentle stream of water at a time. It's the unexpected phone call. It's the renewed strength to face another day. It's the quiet confidence that grows in your heart, telling you that help is on the way. With this newfound hope, my perspective changed entirely. The problem that once looked like an executioner now looked like an opportunity. An opportunity to see God's power up close. The heavy weight on my chest began to feel less like a burden and more like a space that God was filling with His presence. The gray, endless hallway I was trapped in started to show cracks of light. It was the dawn of a divine breakthrough, a slow but certain sunrise that was chasing away the shadows of my despair one by one, promising that the fullness of day was coming. The journey from that first phone call to the final solution was a process. It required patience and continued trust. But with each step, the path became clearer. The job interview led to an offer, one that was better than I could have imagined. It provided not only the financial means to address my problems, but also a renewed sense of purpose. Other tangled parts of my life began to straighten out in surprising ways. It was like watching a time-lapse video of a flower that was once withered and brown, suddenly drawing life from an unseen source, its petals unfurling in vibrant color. This experience taught me a profound truth. My problem wasn't a punishment, it was a doorway. It was the very thing that brought me to my knees and forced me to look for a power greater than my own. In our weakness, God's strength is made perfect. He doesn't just help us climb our mountains, He meets us in the valley where we have fallen. He takes our broken pieces, our fear, our failure, our hopelessness, and He builds something beautiful and new. He turns our greatest trials into our most powerful testimonies of His faithfulness. The Bible reminds us of this truth. In Mark chapter 10 verse 27, Jesus looks at His disciples and says, "With man this is impossible, but not with God. All things are possible with God." This isn't just a nice quote. It's a promise written for the darkest nights and the heaviest burdens. It's for the moments when we are staring at a locked door with no key, a vast ocean with no boat, a giant problem with no solution. It is in these moments of human impossibility that we are perfectly positioned to witness a divine possibility. God delights in doing what we are certain cannot be done. So if you find yourself in the darkness, feeling the weight of a problem that seems too big to bear, do not lose heart. You may feel that you are at your end, but you might just be at the beginning of a miracle. Surrender your struggle, whisper a prayer into the silence, and then watch. Watch for the first crack of dawn. Watch for the door to creak open. Watch for the impossible to bloom right before your eyes. Because you serve a God who can make a way where there is no way, and He will get you through this.